Hey everybody, Jeff Miller here from Target Test Prep. I'm super excited today to chat with you about a really important topic, something that I read about in the forum, something that I talk to students about one-on-one and just hear about all the time. And that topic is why your real GRE score did not match up to your practice test score. Or in other words, why did you score lower on your GRE than you did on your practice test? And in today's video, we are going to discuss 10 important reasons why that could have happened, and then what you can do to fix those issues so that the next time you go into your GRE, you hit the score that you've been hitting on your practice exams. Starting with issue number 1, not taking your practice exams under realistic testing conditions. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to students after they've taken a practice GRE and they've gotten pretty close to their score goal or maybe even exceeded their score goal. But then they drop this on me. Well, I tried to pause the exam, or well, I used a handheld calculator, or I took it in a place that didn't really replicate the test environment. Here's the deal. These practice exams that you're going to be taking, especially the 5 that ETS offers, are very, very important. And as you've learned in past videos of mine, you want to take those practice exams after completing all of the learning phase of your prep. So at that point, you're going to be in a place where you should really be able to tell where you're at and what your actual score is. However, if you don't replicate the testing environment and you don't follow test day rules, such as taking only the allotted breaks, such as not using a handheld calculator because you only can use the on-screen calculator, or if you're going to be taking the at-home GRE and you use pen and paper or pencil and paper where you're not allowed to, all of these things will inflate your GRE practice test score. So what do you think happens at that point? Well, you get these great practice test scores, you think that you're ready to go for the real test, and you go in and all of a sudden, oh boy, your score did not match what you were getting on your practice test. Well, if you think about it, all of those things you were doing in your own testing environment put you in a position where you were scoring higher because you were more comfortable taking the test there. And furthermore, you didn't prepare yourself fully for what the rigors are of test day. So if you're taking extra breaks on your practice test and you're using a handheld calculator, when you get to the real GRE, if you can't do any of those things, then of course your score is not going to match what you had on your practice exam. So obviously the fix is don't do those things when taking your practice exams. Follow test day conditions as much as possible, and if you can do that, you're going to be more prepared to take your test on the actual day, and you won't let these artificial things get in your way, which will affect how you perform on your GRE. Issue number 2 is not taking all 5 ETS practice exams. So on the Target Test Prep study plan, when you get to the practice test phase, we recommend taking all 5 of the offered practice exams by ETS. They're all great exams. 2 of them are actually free. Those are called the Power Prep exams. And then 3 of them you have to pay for. Those are called the Power Prep Plus practice exams. They are all great exams. They all follow a similar look and feel, almost the exact look and feel of what you're going to see on the actual GRE. And obviously ETS has created those exams, so the scoring algorithm is theirs. These are very, very important, not only to see how you're scoring, but to put yourself in a position where, again, you're replicating test day conditions. One of the biggest mistakes that I see from students is they go and take their GRE and they come back and they say, man, I just didn't get my score. What happened? It was lower than the practice exams I took. Well, I say, well, what was your scoring breakdown of all 5 of the ETS practice exams? And then they say, well, I only took 2 of them. And there you go. That's the issue, because the thing is, you need to be able to sit down and you need to be able to replicate test day, not just one time, not just 2 times, but you really want to take all 5 of those practice exams. So when planning your study, you need to make sure that you give yourself enough time, and by doing so, you'll be able to take all 5 of them, and you'll be as confident as possible on test day. And of course, you should be able to mimic what you did on those practice exams on your real GRE. Issue number 3 is relying on unofficial practice exams. Now, this is a big one. And, I hear students all the time, GRE students who are, a couple months into their prep, and they're like, well, I want to start really replicating the test. I want to work on my timing. I hear this all the time. And they're like, well, I'm going to take a practice test every weekend. So that means I need to take 10 to 12 to 15 practice exams. So what ends up happening is they not only exhaust their ETS practice exams, but then they start taking unofficial practice exams that, remember, have their own algorithm. It's not the same as ETS, and also, do not follow the exact kind of layout and feel of what you're seeing from the ETS practice exams. And the thing is, what's going to happen is you're going to get scores in those practice exams that possibly don't match up with what it is you would be doing on an actual ETS exam. And so come test day, of course, you may score lower on the real exam than you would on those practice tests. So here's a really simple solution. And I say this a lot. You really only need those 5 ETS practice exams if you're studying the right way. You don't need to start incorporating practice exams into your prep a month or 2 in. You really just need to focus on, what I've said before, the learning phase of your preparation. You need to master the quant sections. You need to master everything in the verbal sections. And then when that's done, those 5 ETS practice exams are more than enough for you to be successful taking the actual GRE. So look, take the 5 ETS practice exams even before you consider taking any other unofficial practice exams. And again, if you can do that, I really think what you're doing on your practice test scores from those ETS exams will match up with what it is that you're actually doing on test day. Issue number 4. You're prepping with materials designed around questions that are found on official practice exams. So this is really interesting, and I want you to think about this. Imagine the materials that you're using are just based on the questions that exist on the 5 official ETS practice exams. Now you've got 40 verbal and 40 quant questions on each exam, so there is a number of questions that can be designed around those. But then what would happen when you get to taking those tests? If you've been practicing questions that are pretty much in the neighborhood of those questions and concepts, you're going to absolutely dominate those practice exams. But here's the issue. ETS doesn't actually build their real tests based off of what you see in the power prep test. Now, is it possible that some of the types of questions and there's going to be similarities between what is on your practice exams from ETS and what you see on the actual GRE? Yeah, I'd say there is, but it's not going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you are using materials that are formulated around those practice test questions, as I said, you're going to go in and you're going to dominate those practice tests. But then what's going to happen is you're going to get to the real GRE and you're going to say, oh boy, they're asking me stuff that isn't on the same level or isn't the exact same topic from those practice exams, and your score will drop. So it shouldn't be a surprise that if you're using those types of materials, that your real GRE score is of course lower than your practice test scores. Now, what is the solution? Well, the solution is simple. You just need to use materials that are thorough and they're designed and revolving around all of what it is you're expected to learn in GRE Quant and GRE Verbal. I've said this before and I'll say it again. There's a ton of material that you need to learn. So it's not about just bits and pieces from number properties or bits and pieces from sentence equivalence questions. You need to cast a wide net. You need to learn it all so that you won't be surprised for what it is that you see on test day, and furthermore, so that you will do really well in your practice exams and also really, really well on your actual GRE. Issue number 5, being over-reliant on InTest tools. Now keep in mind, these are tools that are available to you during your practice exams, such as the on-screen calculator, or being able to mark questions for review, or being able to skip questions and come back to them. These are all some pretty cool things that you can use on the actual GRE. But what I want to keep in mind here is, you probably will do certain things on your practice exams because you're feeling like there's less pressure, right? And you should take that plan and you should effectively use the same plan you used on your practice exams on your actual GRE. Now, here's the issue. If you don't do that and you have this awesome plan going into test day and you just don't follow it, well, yeah, your actual GRE score is probably going to be lower than what your practice test scores were. So for example, let's say when you're taking your practice exams, you're using your calculator occasionally when there's hard decimal calculations or pretty tedious long division that you have to deal with say a unit conversion, and you're being really strategic when you use it. But let's say you get to the actual GRE and all of a sudden that goes out the window. You get nervous when you see these numbers. You're not trusting in your abilities. And all of a sudden, the calculator is coming on your screen in almost every quant question you see. Well, look, the reality is, and we've written articles about this, the calculator in the GRE is meant to be used strategically. So if all of a sudden your plan goes out the window and you're using a GRE calculator when you have to add, 110 plus 75, like you're going to end up having issues. You're probably going to mess up your timing. You may make some click mistakes when you're clicking through the calculator, and ultimately it's going to lead to a GRE score that's lower than your practice exam scores. And this goes for other things. Let's say on the practice exams, you were strategically going through questions. You weren't skipping any, but you were marking some for review after taking a guess. But let's say on the real GRE, that plan again went out the window and you started skipping questions and telling yourself, well, I've got to get back to those to input an answer before the section ends. These are things that are going to really, really hurt you because they're meant to be helpful, but they're meant to be used strategically. And the fact is, if you're over-reliant on those tools, it's going to bite you and likely it's going to drop what would be a very nice GRE score to something that you're probably less than thrilled with, and furthermore, something that's probably lower than what you were scoring on your practice exams. So of course, the solution is don't be over-reliant on these tools. Come into test day with a plan, but make sure that you execute that plan. Don't let the aura of test day affect what it is you do in the moment when you are taking your GRE. Issue number 6 is falling back on bad habits. So let's discuss what some bad habits could be, because I'm sure many of you watching this video are early on in your GRE prep or maybe have just started it. So bad habits, well, doing mental math in your head when you easily could just write out the math on a whiteboard or pen and paper. Rushing through questions because you're worried about timing. Worrying about the questions ahead of you and not focusing on the question at hand in front of you. Things like writing messy so you can't read your handwriting. These are all really bad habits. Now, the issue is that if these bad habits aren't fixed, or if these bad habits aren't fixed well prior to test day, there's a high likelihood that you are going to fall back on these bad habits as something goes wrong on your test or if you get nervous on the test. So what's the fix here? Well, the fix is locate these bad habits and get them fixed months before you take your GRE. Because again, if you don't, and even if you fix them, let's say you don't have these bad habits anymore prior to taking your practice exams and you do really, really well in your practice exams. You go into test day, you have a plan, you're super methodical with what you're doing, and then all of a sudden the first question hits you and you're like, oh boy, all right, mental math, I'm not going to write this down. I'm worried about the time. oh, how many questions do I have left? Let me think about the question in front of me, etc., etc. Well, the problem is if you fall back on those habits, your practice tests, or your real GRE score is probably going to be lower than your practice test score, because those habits can be super detrimental for your performance on the actual GRE. So again, you need to find those bad habits, you need to fix them, and you need to be super methodical in how it is you're doing things. So if one of those habits, again, is looking ahead to questions, we'll start training yourself and say, you know what? I'm always going to focus on the question in front of me. I'm going to focus on getting that question right, and then I'm going to move on to the next one. And if something goes wrong, I'm not going to worry about what happened in the past. I'm going to move on to the next one. And if I get some sort of calculation that I have to do, I'm not going to do it in my head because I want to avoid that careless mistake. I'm going to do it out on my whiteboard or my paper. And it's like anything in life. The more you train yourself for these things, the more that you do them, you will then do them on test day. The pressure will not affect you so badly that you will fall back on these habits. And ideally, you'll be able to come in line on your real GRE that you were doing on your practice exams. Issue number 7 is putting too much pressure on yourself. This is a very, very important issue that I want to spend some time discussing. And again, we've written many articles on this regarding testing anxiety, and I've mentioned it in past videos. But a lot of the things that we're discussing today can be affected by anxiety. And when we talk about bad habits in the previous point, well, anxiety can force you to rely on bad habits and go back to things you shouldn't be doing. So the key for anyone taking the GRE is to try to eliminate the anxiety. Now look, I realize that it's easier said than done. I know it's at stake when you're taking the GRE. I know how hard you've worked to get to the point you're at. And for some people, they have one more shot before an application deadline. So it's always very concerning when they sit down to take it. But you still can't let your nerves get to you. You can't, because if you do, then you won't perform the way you need to perform. And yeah, your real GRE is probably going to be lower than your practice GRE, because my guess is the type of anxiety that you're putting on yourself on test day is likely not the type of anxiety that you were putting on yourself during your practice exams. So what are some solutions here? Well, first of all, you can try some visualization techniques, right? Start visualizing how it will feel either being in your testing environment for the online exam or being in the testing room for the actual GRE. Imagine yourself breezing through questions, feeling confident, and also not getting thrown off if something doesn't go your way. If you do make a miscalculation, you suck it up, you move on, and you understand that there's more questions to be won, and you just start getting the feeling of how it is to win when you're taking the GRE. And then in the moment, well, think about each GRE question as a mini battle, right? You need to win as many mini battles as possible to actually go ahead and win the war. So you need to have this mindset for test day. You need to be in a position where nothing is going to shake you, right? And look, it's okay if something goes wrong, but it's how you react to that thing going wrong that is going to make you successful on your GRE. And if you let yourself win and you don't let anxiety win and take the day from you, I'm confident that your real GRE score will match what it is you were doing on your practice exams. Issue number 8 is burning yourself out before test day. Now this is a biggie because on the forums, when I'm talking to students, a lot of times I get the question, what should I do the week leading up to my GRE or even days prior to my GRE? Now, I'm going to make the assumption that you followed our advice here in the past. You've strategically taken your practice tests at least 5 days apart, and you're not taking a practice test, 48, 72 hours prior to test day. So you've gotten those done. And if you've done that, that means you're in a position where you likely won't burn yourself out. But if you're in a situation where you haven't been able to take those practice exams, well, the first thing would be maybe try to move your GRE to a later date so that you're not burning the candle at both ends leading up to your exam. But if you can't do that, then you may just have to take less tests. There's no other way around it. Because the thing that I don't want you doing is I don't want you cramming in 3 exams the week of your GRE, and I don't want you cramming the week of your GRE. Trying to learn new material, for example, could be killer for your test. I mean, imagine all of the stuff you've learned up to test day, and then 3 days before your exam, you're going to throw more stuff into the mix. Chances are that's really going to throw you off, and it's not going to help you perform well on your exam. So, and here's the worst part about it. Let's say you've been doing really well on your practice exams leading up to your real test. Well, if you then decide to keep pushing after some great practice test scores and ultimately do burn yourself out, then yeah, your real GRE score is going to be lower than the scores of your practice exam. So just don't put yourself in a position to do that. I understand it's human nature. I understand that you want to stay in front of your GRE materials. And okay, fine. You want to do some lighter studying, go through your notes, go through your vocabulary words, go through your quant formulas, but don't put your head in your materials and reread chapters and do hundreds of questions. It's going to really cloud your head, and going into test day, you probably aren't going to be the best version of yourself. So instead, find some relaxing things to do. You know, some people like to binge watch TV. Some people like to go to the movies even by themselves. Go out to dinner. Do some yoga, take a long walk, hang out with friends. I mean, honestly, do anything that you can do so that your head is not in the GRE space. You're giving it a rest, and you're making sure that when you walk in on test day, your head is going to be clear, you're going to be calm, you're going to be collected, and most of all, you're going to be ready to go to dominate the GRE. If you can do all that, there's no reason why your real GRE score shouldn't be similar to what you were doing on your practice exams. Issue number 9 is implementing last-minute changes to your daily routine. So this is an interesting one, and I've, again, heard many students talk about this. They'll ask, what should I eat in the days leading up to the exam? How should my physical activity be in the days leading up to my exam? Now, there's a lot of advice that people can give here that would be relevant to what you should be doing on those days, but here's the issue. If it's not part of your normal routine and you make these changes days before your GRE, it could have some really negative effects on how you score on that exam, and thus cause you to score lower on your actual GRE than your practice exams. Because look, if you're going to implement new, healthier changes to your diet prior to your GRE, you've got to do that months before, and you've got to do it gradually. Because if you're doing that in just days before your test, you honestly don't know how it's going to affect you, right? Or same with physical activity. Let's say that you do moderate physical activity. You take your dog on long walks, or you walk a lot in general. But 3 days before your test, you say, you know what? Those long walks aren't enough. I'm going to go for a 3-mile jog or a 5-10-mile bike ride. You don't want to do that because physically, you don't know how you're going to react to those things. So if you want to make these changes that you think are going to help you for test day, well, it's simple. Start when you begin with your GRE studying, sit down and ask yourself, what would be the optimal changes you want to make? Physically and mentally, what kind of diet choices do you want to make? And do that so that they're now a part of your everyday routine, and it's not something that you're just changing at the last minute prior to your GRE. And that way, you're eliminating the idea or the potential that those last minute changes will cause you to do worse on your actual exam than you did on your practice exams. The last issue I want to discuss, issue number 10, is just having one of those days. Now, this isn't something you can actually prevent, but I just want to mention it because it is a reason why you may score lower on your actual GRE than your practice exams, but it's not a situation where you can necessarily prevent it. I mean, let's just say you wake up late, your alarm doesn't go off the way it should, or you had a bad day of work the day before your GRE, or you're trying to take public transportation to the test center and it's late, or you're late to the test center, or you're taking the at-home GRE and you have internet connections in the minute leading up to your exam. All of these things are possible, and they can all culminate in you having one of those days. And listen, if that happens to you, first of all, take a step back, take a deep breath, and understand that everybody has them. Sure, not everyone has them when they take the GRE, but everyone has an off day. And yes, some people do have them when taking the GRE. So the key for you is, how are you going to react to this off day or this bad day? If you go in and your actual score is lower than your practice test scores, and you can really think about it and say, wow, so many things happened today that weren't normal and that threw me off my game. Well, what do? You pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you get ready to take another GRE. It's the only way forward, right? Because if you don't, you're going to be in a position where you're going to be regretting everything that happened on that day. And I'm confident that you won't have that bad day the next time you take your exam. So those are the 10 issues I wanted to discuss today. And hopefully you learned a thing or two about what happens when your practice GRE is higher than your actual GRE. And I want you to take each issue into account and really look at yourself and say, are these things happening to me? And if they are, follow the advice here. There are fixes for everything that we discussed here today. And remember, if things don't go your way on test day, but you've been preparing the way you need to and should be leading up to your exam, take a deep breath, get back at it, reschedule your GRE, and I'm confident that you'll get the score that you truly deserve. So thanks everybody for listening and watching today, and I'm looking forward to doing some more stuff with you guys next time. Bye everybody.